They fined Jake Landon $1,000 for flying the American flag in honor of his late veteran father. HOA President Sylvia Crane thought her rigid rules would silence him. But when the Pentagon stepped in, everything changed. And just wait until you hear how this fight for justice ended. It was a warm, clear morning in early July when Jake Landon stepped out onto his front porch, a small folded bundle in his hands. The sunlight caught the edges of the fabric as he carefully unfolded the American flag, bright stripes, crisp stars, and fastened it to the new pole mounted near his door. He'd been waiting for this moment. 2 months earlier, Jake had buried his father, a decorated Vietnam veteran whose quiet strength had shaped Jake's entire life. His father's final request had been simple: keep flying the flag, never forget what it stands for. This was Jake's way of honoring that promise. As he stood back, watching the flag catch the breeze, something shifted inside him. Not grief this time, but a sense of pride. This was his country. This was his home. No one in Willow Creek, a small Virginia community where patriotism was as much a tradition as Sunday potlucks, would think twice about an American flag, or so he believed. 3 days later, returning from a late shift at the hardware store, Jake spotted something taped to the front door, a white envelope with HOA compliance notice stamped in bold red letters. Frowning, he peeled it off and stepped inside. Marissa, his wife, met him at the kitchen table. He handed her the envelope, unease tightening his stomach. She opened it, her eyes scanning the page. Her voice shook as she read aloud. Violation notice. Unauthorized exterior modification. Fine. $1,000. Jake froze. Unauthorized what? Marissa read further, her brow furrowing. The flagpole, it says it violates HOA guidelines. Jake's heart pounded. For flying an American flag? He grabbed the letter. There, in black and white, was the signature of Sylvia Crane, Willow Creek's HOA president. Sylvia was infamous in the neighborhood, a stickler for rules who seemed to take personal satisfaction in enforcing the most obscure regulations. Residents whispered about her rigid interpretation of bylaws, and how she enjoyed reminding everyone who was in charge. Jake didn't waste time. He called the HOA office that evening. To his surprise, Sylvia answered herself. Mrs. Crane, this is Jake Landon, he began, voice steady. I received a violation notice. You fined me for flying an American flag on my porch. Surely that's a mistake. Sylvia's tone was clipped, rehearsed. Mr. Landon, per the Willow Creek guidelines, all exterior modifications must be pre-approved. Flag displays are restricted to designated holidays and must be temporary. Jake gripped the phone tighter. This isn't a decoration. It honors my father, a veteran. A pause. Then Sylvia replied coolly, The fine stands. Jake's breath caught. For a moment he could only stare at the wall, words failing him. Flying the flag, something so fundamental, so right, was now being treated as a violation? He hung up in silence, the phone heavy in his hand. Marissa placed her hand on his arm. What are we going to do? Jake looked at the flag outside, now fluttering gently in the twilight. His voice was low, but certain. We're not taking it down. Shock coursed through their small home that night. The injustice felt surreal. A fine, a threat, for honoring the very freedoms the flag represented. But what Jake didn't know was that this was only the opening move. The battle had just begun. News of Jake's fine spread through Willow Creek faster than he could have imagined. Neighbors stopped him at the mailbox, in the grocery store, even in the church parking lot. They fined you for flying the flag? You've got to be kidding. What is this HOA coming to? Many were sympathetic, some outraged, but others were wary. Sylvia Crane's reputation was well known. Challenging her often led to more trouble. Jake wasn't deterred. He decided to speak out at the next HOA meeting. The community center was unusually full that evening. Word of the flag fine had drawn a crowd. Jake sat near the front, the violation notice folded neatly in his pocket. When the floor opened for resident comments, Jake stood, voice calm but firm. I'd like to address the fine issued to me for flying the American flag on my property, he began, My father was a veteran. Displaying that flag honors his service and the freedom it represents. This fine is not just unnecessary, it's wrong." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. But before he could continue, Sylvia Crane cut in. "Mr. Landon," she said sharply, eyes narrowing, "rules are rules. Emotional appeals do not excuse violations of our bylaws." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. One neighbor whispered audibly, "That's cold." Sylvia heard it. Her expression tightened, but her voice remained composed. "This meeting is not a debate on established community standards." Jake sat down, jaw clenched. The message was clear. Sylvia had no intention of backing down or showing an ounce of understanding. But the battle wasn't over. Far from it. Later that week, Jake returned home to find another envelope taped to his door. This one, larger, marked "Final Notice." Inside was a second citation. "Failure to comply. Additional $500 fine. Lien proceedings will be initiated if balance is unpaid within 10 days. Jake read it twice, barely believing it. A lien on his property. Over a flag? Marissa watched him pace the living room, fists tight at his sides. "They want us to back down," she said softly. Jake stopped, eyes burning with resolve. "I won't. Not for this. My father taught me better." But Sylvia wasn't finished. 2 mornings later, while Jake was at work, Marissa glanced out the window and gasped. 2 uniformed HOA contractors were on their front lawn. One held a ladder. The other carried tools. "They're taking down the flagpole," she whispered in disbelief. A neighbor across the street, Tom Harris, a retired firefighter, noticed the scene and grabbed his phone, recording the entire event. With swift motions, the men removed the flagpole, lowering it without ceremony. The folded flag was placed on the ground like discarded yard waste. Marissa called Jake in tears. They took it down." Jake drove home as fast as he could. When he saw the video Tom had filmed, something inside him shifted. What had started as a fine had turned into something deeper, an act of petty, deliberate disrespect. It wasn't about HOA guidelines anymore. It was about control, about humiliation. Hatred simmered in Jake's chest. They hadn't just fined him. They had desecrated something he valued far more than money or rules. But what Sylvia Crane didn't know was that someone else had also seen that video, someone who would soon take an interest in this fight. A few days after the flagpole incident, Jake found himself sitting across from an old friend at a local tavern, one of the few places he could clear his head. Major David Rollins, an active duty officer at the Pentagon, had been Jake's best man years ago. They still met for beers now and then, though life and work kept those evenings rare. But tonight, Jake needed to talk. Over a pair of cold drinks, Jake laid it all out. The fine, the threats, the forced removal of the flagpole, and the HOA president's complete indifference. Rollins listened in silence, arms folded. But when Jake reached the part about the flag being discarded on the ground, something shifted in his friend's expression. Rollins leaned forward, jaw tightening. "They fined you for flying the American flag in America?" Jake met his gaze and nodded grimly. Rollins didn't say much after that, but Jake noticed how the major's eyes stayed hard, his mind clearly working. The next morning, Rollins wasn't calling as a friend. He was calling as an officer, one who knew that under federal law, certain protections existed for exactly this kind of situation. By midweek, the wheels were in motion. The Department of Defense Public Affairs Office had reviewed the case, and they weren't pleased. A certified letter soon arrived at the Landon home. Jake opened it at the kitchen table, Marissa leaning in close. It read, "This HOA action appears to violate the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. This matter is being reviewed for compliance with federal law." Jake exhaled slowly. They're taking it seriously. But the Pentagon wasn't about to stop at a strongly worded letter. 1 week later, the Willow Creek HOA board gathered for their monthly meeting. Sylvia Crane sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, until the back door opened. 2 uniformed representatives from the Department of Defense Legal Affairs Division entered quietly. No fanfare, no announcement, but everyone noticed. The room fell into a tense hush as the 2 representatives stepped forward and introduced themselves, one placing a small folder on the table before Sylvia. "We are here regarding an unlawful attempt to penalize an American citizen for the legal display of the national flag," one of them stated calmly. Sylvia's composure cracked, just slightly. A flicker of pale surprise crossed her face. The rest of the board exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Jake wasn't present. He had chosen not to attend this time. But as word spread later that night, he learned that for the first time in weeks, the board had been utterly silent, and the fight for justice was only gathering steam. What followed in the days after the Department of Defense representatives arrived was both swift and public. During that very HOA meeting, one of the DoD representatives calmly opened the folder they had brought, withdrawing a printed copy of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. With practiced clarity, they read aloud for the record, "Any homeowners association action that attempts to restrict or penalize the legal display of the United States flag by a property owner is subject to federal enforcement and potential legal action." Every word seemed to hang in the air. Then came the formal notice, a written cease and desist order served directly to the Willow Creek HOA board. Sylvia Crane attempted to recover her footing. She raised a hand, voice steady but strained. "Our community guidelines are focused on maintaining aesthetic standards. We weren't targeting anyone's patriotism," she said carefully. One of the representatives replied without hesitation, "Ma'am, federal law supersedes HOA guidelines. This action is unlawful. There will be no further debate on the matter." No one on the board spoke after that. The next 48 hours brought the kind of clarity that only legal counsel could deliver. By official notice, the HOA rescinded Jake's fine in full. The lien threat was withdrawn immediately. A written apology, carefully worded under the advice of attorneys, was delivered to the Landon home. But justice was not yet complete. The Pentagon, aware of growing public interest, issued a national press statement. It referenced the Willow Creek case directly. "No HOA or private governing body may infringe upon an American citizen's right to display the national flag in accordance with federal law. Communities nationwide are reminded to comply with this statute." The story spread quickly. Within days, news crews arrived in Willow Creek, cameras rolling, reporters eager to speak with the man at the center of it all. Jake, standing beneath a newly reinstalled flagpole, the same pole that had once been removed, spoke to them calmly. "This was never about me," he said. "It was about standing up for the freedoms my father, and so many others, fought to protect. And I'll keep doing that, as long as I live here." That simple statement resonated far beyond Willow Creek. Sylvia Crane quietly resigned from her position just days later, and each morning afterward, as the sun rose over the neighborhood, the Landon family's flag flew high once again, this time with the full weight of the law behind it.